Today, we're going to start a new standard and we're going to learn about the cooperation, the way they worked well together between the colonists and the Native Americans, because at the very beginning, they were cooperating with each other. So let's learn about what happened to cause them to not cooperate with each other any longer. What made that big divide? And I bet you can make some predictions from what we've learned about in our fourth grade standards this year. Remember, this is a continuation of what you would have learned in third grade last year when we went to quarantine. So the first thing that we're going to learn about is how did the fur trade impact American Indian cultures? In the 1600s and 1700s, furs, especially beaver furs, were in high demand in Europe. These furs were used to make hats. Traditionally, in tribes, women tended crops and men hunted for food. After the demand for furs increased, it went up. American Indian men hunted not just for food, but for furs to trade. This gained them more status in the community. This changed the social structure of many tribes, meaning the women tended the crops, the men hunted for food. It's going to change that whole structure of how their tribes would work. Men were in charge of trapping animals, and the women were in charge of the animal furs. This gave women an important role in the fur trade. So whereas before they were only tending the crops, now they have added responsibility, and that's to take the furs off the animal, to clean the furs, to make them presentable for sale. And this gave them a lot of power in their tribes. Many different tribes competed for hunting grounds for beavers. This led to more violence because both tribes wanted the same section of ground to hunt on, and they couldn't agree or couldn't share it or wouldn't share it, so they got violent with each other. American Indians traded the furs for European goods. Now, what is that? What did Europe have that the natives wanted? Guns and metal tools. Guns and metal tools. They didn't have things made out of metal. They had wood and bone tools and weapons. So that replaced their old style of weapons, and they wanted more and more of the things made out of metal. The beaver trade collapsed in the mid 1800s. That means it was going really good and then it just went away. And many tribes were plunged into poverty because they couldn't trap beaver. They couldn't trade with the Europeans. Because of that, they had no money. They had asked their women to stop tending the crops and to take care of the furs. So there was that whole breakdown. And so we're seeing now natives that cannot take care of their own families. They don't know what to do. They have become too dependent on the fur trade for their way of life. Now, can you make a prediction about what caused the fur trade to collapse? If everyone is hunting them, what do you think it would be? Hopefully you're saying over hunting. There were no beaver left. They were becoming endangered because they had been over hunted. Now the next slide says American Indians mixed feelings on colonists. Okay, so they liked them, but they didn't like them. But they liked them, but they didn't like them. Let's learn about that. American Indian tribes had different opinions on how to interact with colonists. A lot of these differing opinions came from how the colonists treated the American Indian tribes. The French settlers early on treated them a bit better. They treated the natives a bit better. They were more willing to join into American Indian ways of life. They didn't expect them to totally change all the things that they had done for years and years and years and years. They said, oh, let's learn about your culture and we will do some of the things that you do. It helped them get better furs to sell. They weren't doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. They wanted the natives to trade with them, the French. So they became friendly with them. American Indians, that were in contact with Spanish explorers. See, that's from Spain. Those were from France. These are from Spain. However, were forced into slavery. and suffered from disease. Well, if someone's going to make you their slave and pass on the diseases they bring over from Europe, you're not going to have a friendly attitude towards them. So the natives did like the French, but they did not like the Spanish. English settlers arrived later on. At first, the American Indians were willing to help with the small groups of English settlers. The story of John Smith and his time spent with Powhatan is a good example of this. In the mid to late 1600s, more colonists arrived. They began to quickly claim land and cut down all the trees. Now, we've said this all along. This is what began the conflict between the colonists and the natives. They claimed the land that the natives had lived on for thousands of years and said, it's ours. And then they cut down all the trees, which not only took away their homes, but the homes of the animals they hunted. It says, good relations turned sour. They did not like the natives did not like the white man anymore. In the mid-1700s, things got so bad that the King of England even ordered that only the crown, only the king, only the royalty could buy land from the tribes. Colonists fought this order. It changed boundary lines that put some of the lands that were already living on outside of the border. Remember, that's that proclamation of 1763. And we were told, the colonists were told, you can have this land. Well, after that proclamation, the king gave it back to the natives and said, you've got to get back off of it. So that was anger towards the king, but anger towards the natives because they felt like they had earned that land in the French and Indian War. And now the king was giving it back to those natives. They were angry about having the land they had developed taken from them. Some colonists felt they had a right to the land. Some even believed that the American Indians were less than human, they weren't even people, and didn't deserve the land. Some tribes were able to resist colonial expansion at first. The Iroquois up in New England, in the New England region on the northeast coast, were one such tribe. They formed the League of the Iroquois in 1570. The League treated the Europeans with caution. They're like, we want to like you, but we're not sure if we should trust you. However, they still chose to trade with them. They even allied with the British in a war against the French, which I was just talking about, the French and Indian War. They fought with them. However, they could not agree on a side to take during the American Revolution. After the war, the League was no more. There was no more helping each other out, no more cooperation. Now, the last slide that we're going to do today is slide 4, and it's the Pico War. The Pico War. Oop, went back off of it. Many American Indians got tired of being treated poorly by Europeans. Throughout the mid to late 1600s, there was a series of violent battles between the Europeans and the American Indians. Now, that is the French, the Spanish, and the English. All three of those are European countries. This included the first important Indian uprising in 1622 in Virginia. This was called the Pico War in 1637. These skirmishes, little battles, little shooting at each other, little fighting, did not just happen on the East Coast. Pueblos in New Mexico, which is down in the southwest, the southwest rose up against the Spanish in 1626. In a few cases, some small battles were won, but in most cases, the battles meant defeat for American Indians. They also lost more and more of their homeland. And the biggest problem was they didn't have the same ammunition and weapons that the settlers did. They couldn't fight with their bone and wooden and stone weapons against these powerful weapons that the settlers came over with, their guns and their ammunition that went along with it. Now, tomorrow we're going to finish